של ג'וגליקר, וככה הכרתי אותו כבר בשנה הראשונה ללימודים, והבנתי ישר שהוא המורה שלי ואיתו אני רוצה ללמוד, ובאמת למדתי איתו 3 שנים, ובסופו של דבר גם כשפתחתי את הקליניקה שלי בהודו, אז ביקשתי ממנו שיבוא ויעבוד איתי, וככה עשיתי איתו מין סטאז' כזה, שהוא היה ככה רופא בקליניקה, ואני ישבתי איתו על כל האבחונים, זה היה אחד התקופות המרגשות בחיי ככה של הלימוד. דוקטור ג'וגליקר הוא בעיניי מורה מדהים, אחד האנשים היותר פתוחים שאני מכירה, אחד האנשים היותר מבינים, היותר מתעניינים בדברים, הוא גם MD וגם רופא איורבדי, זאת אומרת בהודו הרבה פעמים עושים תואר משולב כזה, שאתה לומד גם את כל 5 שנים MD וגם את 5 שנים איורבדה, אז הוא עשה את באמת התואר המשולב הזה, אז הוא יודע גם, מבין מאוד ברפואה מערבית, גם מקביל לרפואה הודית, ואני חושבת שהוא רופא מצוין ומורה מדהים, הוא מרצה בכל העולם, באירופה בעיקר, ובדרך כלל כשאין קורונה אז הוא טס ממקום למקום חצי מהשנה ומרצה ומכשיר מטפלים, והיום הוא ידבר על מערכת העיכול בראייה איורבדית ועל צמחים למערכת העיכול. סליל, I was just talking very highly about you, so
so you told all good stuff, I hope.
I told everything, like all the good stuff. I never said anything bad about you.
Okay, so you have built some high hopes of the lecture, huh?
Yes, I have really high hopes for the lecture. And during your lecture, if you have any questions, if you want Salil to answer it directly, so just write it in English. I will also be all over the lecture. I will be there, and I can look into it. And if there is something like someone's going to write something that's not really like we didn't understand because of the English or something was this, so I will try to clarify. So I'm here for any question. If you have questions that you're not sure, but you can write in Hebrew, and I can address it, and I can ask Salil or translate to Salil or this. Just know that I'm around. So anything you need to know, if it's Ayurveda or something, I'm here. Okay. So Salil.
So thank you very much, Lital. Thank you, Yaniv. Thank you, Shelly, for inviting me to give this talk. So I will just share my screen. So a little bit about me. I'm a Vaidya. In India, doctor of Ayurvedic medicine, we use the prefix Vaidya and not just doctor, because Vaidya comes from the word wisdom. So normally we are supposed to be knowledgeable. So we are called as Vaidyas. I have done my graduation and post-graduation in Ayurveda. And I have also done a fellowship which is called as Vaidya Scientist. This was a fellowship that was started by the government of India, Ministry of Ayush. What they did, they selected 15 people from all over India, all postgraduates in Ayurveda. It was a very tough examination. And then they trained us in also the Western scientific methodology of how to do research. So this was a 2-year fellowship. So I'm also a Vaidya scientist. And today also in my presentations, you will see that I will give information from also the modern scientific review of various herbs. So we have a clinic in Pune, me and my wife, who is also an Ayurvedic doctor, and we also teach in many countries all around the world. I've been to Israel, I think 4 or 5 times. It is one of my favorite countries. I love the people, I love the food. So it's always nice to talk to anybody from Israel. And I also teach in one college here, which is one of the oldest and the biggest college of Ayurveda. So today's lecture, I have divided it into 3 parts. As you can see, the title of the lecture is The Digestive System, an Ayurvedic Perspective of Therapeutics. So we will be, of course, concentrating on the therapeutics. But what I have done, I have divided the lecture into 3 parts. In the first part, I will be talking about how Ayurveda looks at herbs. What are some of the criteria that we use for selecting a herb? That will be the first part. In the second part, I will be talking about some common diseases of the digestive system. And in the third part, I will be talking about the common herbs that we can use to treat the diseases of the digestive system. And me and Lital will discuss the herbs that which we should have, because there are so many herbs that we can use, and we shortlisted the herbs that you can use in Israel. So of course the list of the herb is not extensive. There are many more herbs apart from this, also formulations that we can use. But I have kept the list limited to a few herbs, and especially the herbs that you can get in Israel. My idea is that at the end of the talk, I will keep some time to answer your questions to the best of my ability. But like Lital said, if there is something that you need to be answered immediately, please put it in the chat box, and then I will pause and I will try and answer your questions. Okay, so with this brief introduction, let's begin with this beautiful journey. So in Ayurveda, the phytotherapy, we call it as Dravya Guna Vijnana. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about this Dravya Guna Vijnana. It's a science, and it's a science that did not evolve just spontaneously. It's not that this one fine day they thought about all these herbs. So there must have been a process that must have been followed before this science really came into existence. So let's see some of the possibilities how this science came into existence. So I think the whole evolution of this science started out of necessity. So we can imagine our primitive ancestors, most probably living on some prairie lands in Africa, going around enjoying their life, hunting, gathering. And during this evolution, there were some progresses. For example, they discovered fire, which I think was a major step in the human evolution. And they must have also discovered some ways or methods of preserving food. Now, of course, this gave us a big boon, because once we started using fire to cook our food, not only our food became more tastier, it also became more easily digestible, because then our digestive fires have to work less. Actually, there is some research which shows that it is because we eat cooked food, we don't have to go on eating 20 hours a day. Otherwise, we would have to support the brain size that we have, the calories that would be needed. And if we only had a raw diet, it might have taken us a large amount of our day would have been spent in just eating or feeding ourselves. So fire itself was a big boon. But what it also did was, because of this ability to use fire and this preservation method, I think humanity moved away a little bit from the natural rhythms of feeding and resting. So it's not that you only eat when you're hungry, because now you have some food that you have preserved. So you always have kind of access to food, like we see happening to us nowadays. So, Yaniv, do you have a question?
Yes, Salil, can you try please to move a little bit the microphone, because we hear you too loud.
Am I too loud?
Yeah, if you can maybe...
Is it better now?
I think
Is it better now?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Salil, I think you're trying to share two documents at once, because we seeing like on the screen, we have like a note, please move this window away from the shared. So just see if you are sharing two documents together.
Okay, I'll try that. I'll try that. So I'll stop share.
And just share the presentation without the other document.
Okay. And let's see. Does it? Yeah, now I think it's okay, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you for pointing it out to me, because I was seeing that window, but I thought it was something technical, so I didn't bother a lot. Anyway, thanks. Is my sound okay now, Yaniv? Okay, perfect. So also what happened is, because of this ability to preserve food and to feed when they felt like it, so the people started moving away from the natural rhythms of hunger and feeding and resting. And also, to add to that, we have the migrations which started taking place because of some environmental reasons, most probably, which led to mixing up of communities. As we can also see currently with this whole COVID pandemic, the pandemic did not remain localized in one country. Because of the migration or the movement of the people, this virus could travel. And similarly, I think in these days, as people started moving around, mixing around, they also carried some diseases with them, and this led people to be exposed to different kind of diseases. Now, what might have also started happening is once they started having food which tasted better, and we all know this from experience that when the food is tasty, it is really hard to say no. I have had the experience with hummus and bamba in Israel. It's really difficult to say no. So I think that was must have started, and of course, because of this preservation techniques and using the fire, now they had a choice. They had a choice of taste, so they could actually have preferential eating. So they did not just need to eat what was available. Now they had a choice, so they could decide whatever they wanted. And the human tendency, of course, is always to go for sweets and sour and salty kind of food. And so this must have started creating some diseases. And I think at this time, nature came to their rescue. Now, these people at this time, they were kind of quite intelligent, and because their whole survival depended on being very observant of their surroundings, I'm sure they must have observed the nature, and they must have seen what is going around in nature. They might have seen that certain animals, when they are not feeling well, they do certain things. And they might have thought, okay, can we use the same kind of methodology on ourselves? So that might have led them to make some experimentation. And out of this experimentation, they must have got some experiences which they adapted, obviously, to change to suit us. And from there, I think they started formulating some principles. And again, these principles were examined, they were debated. That's why the word that we use in Ayurveda or Sanskrit for any such kind of fundamental principle is Siddhanta. And the word Siddhanta means something that has been proven at the end of a long scientific process. So this must have led to formulations of certain principles. And this, I think, gave birth to science. And the science is the science of Dravyaguna Shastra. So like I said, initially we copied the animals. So those of you who have cats, you must have seen that when the cat has some digestive problems, it goes, searches and eats a particular kind of grass, which induces vomiting. And afterward, the cat feels better. So I think our ancestors, they must have observed the behavior of behavioral of animals, because animals, they have a natural instinct for remedies. They don't have to go to a herbal school, or they don't have to attend a conference like this to learn about herbs. Thank God. And so our ancestors must have most probably started using this kind of similar remedies for ourselves. So I think this is where the science began. Now, one of the beauties of Ayurveda is that even though it is quite an old science, one of the learnings or teachings of Ayurveda is that a science that doesn't evolve is a dead science. So even though it's a science that has been in practice now more than 2,000 or 3,000 years, it is a very much an evolving science. It is not a dead science. So things that were useful were kept, and things which were not useful, that did not stand true to the trust of time, this kind of things were eliminated from the science. So I think this is how the whole science began. And most probably, I think it might have began with poisons. Why am I saying this? Because, you know, in nature, suppose there is an animal that goes and eats a particular flower, and soon that animal is dead or has some very drastic effects. Whereas if the same animal eats a plant which is just next to this plant, nothing big happens. So people might have been curious, what is it about this plant that has such drastic effect? So maybe that is why there was a lot of curiosity. And in Ayurveda, we do use a lot, not a lot, we do use poisonous plants. We use them in a very specific way. I will be talking about it a little bit later. But this whole idea of the poisons, looking at their rapid action, it might have helped to bring in more clarity about how the body works and how this kind of medicines can be created from this kind of poisonous substances. And I think our ancestors, who were very intelligent, very intuitive, they might have used these poisons which were a curse and converted into a boon. And I think from there, the beginning of herbal medicine must have happened. So this is my take on how herbal medicine started and evolved. Now let's see a little bit about the Dravya Guna Vidyan or the Ayurvedic phytotherapy. You know, when we think about plants, there are two ways that we can classify the plants. One is what is very commonly used is a morphological classification. So based on particular characteristics of a plant, we classify them. And the other method is to do a functional classification. Functional classification means classify the plant based on particular actions. So like I said, the morphological classification is based on external characteristics. It's a very useful way of doing things because it helps in easy identification, classification, and also standardization of the plants, especially when we are talking about research. And it is widely used by botanical sciences. So even today in my presentation, whenever I mention a Ayurvedic plant, I will provide with the botanical name which is commonly used. So anybody on the planet would know what I'm talking about. Whereas in functional classification, we look at what are the innate characteristics of that particular plant. I will talk about what is this innate characteristics soon. Now, once you have this functional classification knowledge, it helps you to have easy utilization, because once you know, okay, this plant has this particular function, that also brings in ease of therapeutics. So you can use it more easily and more readily, because the morphological classification will not give you information about the therapeutics, whereas functional classification definitely will give you information about the therapeutic selection. And sciences like Ayurveda and naturopathy, maybe also Chinese medicine. I don't know so much about Chinese medicine, so I cannot really comment. We use functional classification as one of the methods. We also use a morphological classification, and we also use a lot the functional classification. So just to give you an example about this classification, take the example of the Ranunculaceae family. So from this family, you have two herbs, Aconitum ferox and Aconitum heterophyllum. Both of them, they are from the same family, Ranunculaceae. So the morphological classification is same family. Whereas functionally, Aconitum ferox is a poison, whereas Aconitum heterophyllum, we use it as an antidote for the poison. So you can see functional classification. If I have to select a product as an antidote, I know that I can use this plant. So functional classification helps me to choose the herbs for therapy. Of course, the morphological classification is equally important. So in Ayurvedic texts, here I have given you a picture of one of the old Ayurvedic texts, which are called as Nighantus. Nighantus is a compilation of the herbs. So the herbs are grouped under different function. So you might have two herbs belonging to absolutely two different families, but because they exhibit similar functions, they are grouped together. And in one of the major texts that we use in Ayurveda, which is the Charaka Samhita or the Sushruta Samhita or Vagbhata, there are classifications. So under for example, if you want to look at a group which is called as sleep inducing herbs, you will find that there is a group of 10 herbs. Morphologically, they are absolutely different, but functionally, all of them induce sleep. So it helps easily to select the herbs. And once I know this 10 herbs in this group, if I don't have one, I know what alternative herb I can use. Morphological classification will not give me this ability. So there are a lot of benefits of doing this kind of functional classification. Now, before we go ahead, let me just talk to you a little bit about how Ayurveda looks at how humans were created. Just a note, anywhere where I use Sanskrit in the presentation, I use an internationally accepted transliteration, which is called as the IAST transliteration method. So you can just Google it and you will get a whole list. So sometimes the spellings might sound look weird to you, but it's in the correct scientific form. Okay, now Ayurveda believes that everything in this universe is comprised of 5 basic elements, what we call it as the Pancha Mahabhutas. And out of the combinations of these 5 basic elements, we get a whole variety of things that we see in the world. It is just 5 basic elements that mix together in different proportions, and we have this billions and billions of things in the universe. Now, the humans, we are also a part of the universe. What is the difference between, let's say, this bottle of water and me? That bottle of water is also made from 5 basic elements. I am also made from 5 basic elements. The difference is that I have consciousness, or I have awareness. You can call it as the soul or whatever you want, but we can say it's the consciousness. So when this combination of the 5 basic elements is joined by the consciousness, it creates the human body. And in the human body, this Panchamahabhutas, or 5 basic elements, they create many different things. But from our point of view of study of phytotherapy, it creates the functional components of our body and the structural components of our body. So they create the physiology of our body and they create the anatomy of our body. I'm sure Lital has talked about the doshas in the morning when she gave the introduction. So you must be familiar with the word dosha. These are the functional components of our body. And the dhatus, these are like our tissues, like blood and muscles and bones and fat, our reproductive tissue, nervous system. So these are all the structural components. All of them, they have the root in the 5 basic elements. And this principle in Ayurveda, we call it as the Panchamahabhuta Siddhanta. I've already told you what the word Siddhanta means. Siddhanta means a principle that has been tested, debated, experimented, and only then accepted. It is not just somebody thought about it and let's say, oh, let's do it like this. So it goes through a scientific rigor. Now, where do these functions they come in? Like I said, Ayurveda believes that everything in this universe is created out of the permutations and combinations or coming together of these 5 basic elements. So out of this 5 basic elements, permutation and combination in the plant life, it results into two different aspects. The first aspect is what is called as the rasa. Rasa means the tastes. Ayurveda classifies edible things not according to their protein, carbohydrate, fat, but we classify them according to the 6 tastes. And later on, I will tell you which 6 tastes they are. Maybe Lital has already mentioned this in her talk. And then we have the innate characteristics, which are called as the gunas. Why do we use the word innate characteristics? We can also call it as potentials, because these things are always there. They are present right from the time this particular object comes into existence. So that is an innate characteristic, or that's something that they are born with. And these are also made from the Panchamahabhutas. And again, this follows the Panchamahabhuta Siddhanta. Now let's talk a little bit about the pharmacokinetic of herbs. What is pharmacokinetics? Means how does the herb work like a therapy, or how does it work like a medicine? This is called as pharmacokinetics. So like I told you, in Ayurveda, that we believe that anything that we put into our mouth normally has one of the 6 tastes, or one or many of the 6 tastes, and the 6 tastes are sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent. I've also given the Sanskrit names for those of you who are interested. Many times we know astringent more as an effect. It is like when you put a fruit of kaki or persimmon in the mouth, you have this like suddenly your mouth goes very dry and everything just like you feel sucked. Or when you take some very bitter coffee, the aftertaste of bitter coffee is this kind of drying effect. What is the astringent taste? Now this 6 tastes, because they are made up from the 5 basic elements, they have either an agonist or they have an antagonist effect on our functional components and structural components. So they will either increase our functional components, or they will decrease our functional components, or they will increase our structural components, or they will decrease our functional components. Okay, you might have all experienced this. Suppose you eat something very sour, you immediately start salivating, and if you eat a lot of sour, you can get hyperacidity. So that is a very good example where it shows how a taste can affect a function of your body and the structure of your body. So they can have an antagonist or agonist effect. Now this is based on a principle which is called as the principle of similarity and specificity, or the Samanya Vishesha Siddhanta. What does this principle? I'll quickly explain to you in a very short line, because it's a huge principle, and this is actually one of the most important principles from the point of view of Ayurveda. So this principle says that when you mix two similar things, it leads to an addition effect, or it leads to an increase. And when you mix opposite things, it leads to a decrease. So for example, let's say you are making pasta and you taste the sauce and the sauce tastes very sour. Normally what do? You add some sugar. So sugar is something that is opposite to sour. Sweet is opposite to sour. So it helps to bring down the sourness of the sauce. So here we have used specificity. Or on the other hand, if you have something sweet and you add more sugar, which similar things, you will have an agonist effect. So there will be an addition. So this principle is also used in modern pharmacotherapy. It is called as synergism and antagonism. So now let's talk about a little bit about this guna and another factor which is called as the karma. Like I told you about, these gunas, these are potentials. Potential means what? That these are possibilities that are possible in that particular plant. For example, if I ask you black pepper, what is it? You would say, it's heating, because when we eat a lot of black pepper, we can feel the heat. Now, unless and until that black pepper enters your body, you will not have the heating effect. But this heating effect was always there in the plant. So that's why it is an innate characteristic. This characteristic is a potential, and this potential needs to be expressed or manifested. So and if this potential was not present, so black pepper would have never been used as a spice, right? So this characteristic is always present. This is called as a guna. Whereas the manifestation, so the heating effect that you will see with black pepper, this is the manifestation, what we call in Sanskrit as the karma. Karma means the action. You might have heard this word karma in many different different aspects. But from the Ayurvedic point of view, when it comes to Dravya Guna Vidyan or when it comes to phytotherapy, karma means a particular action that is shown by a herb. Now, what Ayurveda has done when it comes to plants, Ayurveda has listed 10 gunas which are common that we find in the plants. These are the different potentials and their antagonist gunas. So in the whole animal kingdom or whatever we put into our body, there are only these 20 gunas. There is nothing more than this 20 gunas. Some things they have one or two, maybe some have more, but it's always something in between these 20 gunas. And each of these guna has a very specific effect and a specific manifestation. So here is the list of the 20 gunas. At the end, I will be providing you with the handouts of my presentation. So you don't have to write down anything. You don't have to take notes. Everything is there if you are interested. So I've just given you this list of 20 gunas like heavy. Now heavy is not heavy by weight. Heavy is how easy or how difficult is a thing to digest. For example, if you take popcorn, without the caramel and all this really other stuff that we put on it, if you just take popcorn, it is light to digest. Whereas if you take a big piece of meat or if you take a big piece of cheese, it is much more heavier to digest. So heavy is not just about density. Heavy is about how easy is it to digest or not. Similarly, we have slow acting, fast acting, we have cold, we have hot. So there are 20 different gunas that are present in the herbs. So like I gave you the example, let's think about black pepper. Now from the list of these 20 gunas, what are the innate characteristic it has? It is laghu, means it is light. It is penetrating. You must have seen that you take you start making some powder of black pepper, a little bit goes in your nose and immediately you start sneezing. It is very rapid. It is very fast acting. In fact, in medicine, we do use black pepper as a bioavailability enhancer. What does it mean? That if you have a herb and if you give black pepper along with this herb, black pepper helps this other herb to travel much more faster in our body and get assimilated more faster. So it's a bioavailability enhancer, and it's heating in nature. So what will it do to the three functional components of our body? It will increase the vata, it will increase the pitta, and it will decrease the kapha. So this is how we can use the characteristic to have a functional impact or have a manifestation on the functional components of our body. So this is the relation between selecting a herb, looking at the characteristics, and having an idea of the manifestation. So here is like I said also about the 6 tastes. Similarly, this 20 characteristics, they also can have an agonist or they can have an antagonist effect on our functional components as well as on our structural components. They can increase or they can decrease a particular functional or a structural component. And again, it comes from the same principle, the principle of similarity and specificity. Now, another very interesting concept that we have in Ayurveda when it comes to selection of herbs is the concept of targeted action, what we call it as gamitva. It is not something that just Ayurveda thinks about. Even in Western herbalism, there is a similar concept. I will talk about it a bit later. So what is gamitva? If you have seen, just like humans, plants also have various structures and they have various forms. And oftentimes there is a resemblance between a particular part of a plant and a particular body part that the humans have. So if you must have seen almonds, they look a little bit like the eyes, or pomegranate, it looks a little bit like the ovaries, right? So there is similarity. And Ayurveda believes that a similar looking plant part can work on a similar looking body part. So this is a targeted action. So if I select a plant part which resembles a body part, then this plant might have a targeted action towards that particular part of my body. This is called as the concept of gamitva. So here I have given you a cross section of the fig fruit. Now when you see this cross section of the fig fruit, does it not look like this? Does it not look like the cross section of our intestines? And all of us who practice herbal medicine, we know that figs have a very beneficial effect on the intestines. So figs have an affinity for the intestines. So gamitva means having an affinity. Like I said, also in Western herbalism or modern herbalism, there is this principle of signatures, which is kind of similar to Ayurveda's concept of gamitva or targeted action. So if you take a plant, for example, if you take dandelion, pisoli, it has yellow colored flowers and it has an affinity to work on the bile. And this is by the principle of signature. So again, kind of the similar concept. Now, gamitva or this targeted action can be one very important factor for selecting a herb. So I might have a few herbs and I want one of them to work on the uterus. Suppose I have a lady who has come to me with some problem of the uterus and I want to give her a herb that will work on the uterus. Now, if I have this knowledge of the gamitva or the targeted action, then I can select a very specific herb which will go and target that particular organ. Now, this targeted action is not always a desirable effect. Okay, so sometimes a plant might have or an object might have a particular targeted organ, but the action that comes out might not be so good. So here I am giving you an example of two things. One is ghee. Ghee is clarified butter, and in Ayurveda, for us it is like nectar because it has a lot of health benefits. And then you have a poison. Now both of these, the ghee as well as a poison, they have an affinity for our nervous system. Both of them have a targeted action towards our nervous system. Now ghee is very beneficial for the nervous system, whereas all of us, we know normally poisons are not so good for our nervous system. So in this case, ghee has a beneficial targeted action, whereas this poison will have an unwanted targeted action. Now, does it mean that so we cannot use this? No, the beauty of Ayurveda is that Ayurveda can use everything on the planet to have some benefit. So what we do is we do a little bit of tweaking in the action, and then we can use this particular substance which has a detrimental or a bad effect, and we can use it as a transport mechanism. Because it is going fast to a particular organ, it has an affinity to go towards an organ, so we can use it as a vehicle to carry some other drugs. So we use it as a drug delivery system. We use it as a targeted drug delivery system. Now, when I look at this whole idea of pharmacokinetics from Ayurveda, which has been described 3000 years ago, and now when you see how modern pharmacological products are developed, you always hear about this targeted deliveries. Like, for example, if you take a simple PPI is proton pump inhibitor, like omeprazole, you will see that you are told not to break the capsule because the capsule ensures that it doesn't dissolve in the stomach, but it is only absorbed into the intestines. That is a targeted drug delivery. Ayurveda has thought about this more than 2000 years ago. Okay, so that is Gametur. So just to give you an idea, so here you have a herb with a targeted action but some undesired effects. So what do? In Ayurveda, we process these herbs in particular way that is called as samskara. Samskara means processing. So the targeted action is retained, so it will still go to that particular organ, but the undesired effects are eliminated. So I'll give you an example. We talked about Aconitum ferox in the beginning, which is a poisonous substance, and we do use it as medicine. Aconitum ferox being a poison, it has an affinity for the blood. If you take raw Aconitum ferox, it can really create a lot of blood problems. So what we do, we take the Aconitum ferox and we process it with cow's milk, or there are also a couple of other methods, and then we use it as an antipyretic because it still retains its diaphoretic action. Diaphoresis means creates sweating, and because it is a poison, it travels very rapidly in our body. It doesn't wait for it to get digested. So what we have done, what Ayurveda has done, it has retained the benefits and it has removed the bad effects. And how it is done? It is by doing samskara. Now, another very important concept that we have in Ayurveda when we select herbs is this knowledge of organogenesis. In Ayurveda, when we study the anatomy, Ayurveda believes that particular organs of our body are formed from particular tissues. So, for example, if you see in this picture, what I have shown you on the right, which is in purple color, is a cross section of our lungs. This is how our lungs look in a cross section. Now, Ayurveda says that lungs are created from the foam in the blood. So, when you have bubbles or foam in the blood, it creates lungs. Can you see the similarity in the two pictures? You can almost see the alveoli. So, any herb that works on the blood will also work on the lungs. So if we can understand this relationship, if we know where a particular organ is coming from, what is the organogenesis, what is the root, which are the tissues which go into forming of this particular body organ, then we can select the herb that will go and affect that particular organ. So to give you an example, one of the most commonly used blood that we herb for the blood disorders is Vasa. The botanical name is Adathoda vasica. It's a very common herb that we use in India for all types of problems. I think it is not available in Israel, but later on I will be talking about another herb which is very easily available in Israel, and we use it with a similar idea. So Vasa is mainly a herb that we use for blood, and it is equally an effective herb for the lungs, because Vasa works on the blood and the lungs are created from the blood. So Vasa has a very targeted action towards the lungs and the blood. And currently in this COVID, this is one of the arrows in our cure. Vasa we are using quite a lot in many different manifestations of COVID. Okay, in Ayurveda we have this principle of microcosm and macrocosm. So if you see in this picture on the left, you can see a picture of the neurons in our brain, and on the right you can see a snapshot of the universe, how the universe looks like. So Ayurveda believes that everything in the universe is kind of represented in our body. Everything that is outside is also inside. So these five basic elements in our body, they create particular structures. For example, Akasha, which is the space element, it creates hollow structures. So like our intestines, our stomach, and our lungs. The Vayu or the air, it creates all types of pulsating and mobile structures. So our musculoskeletal system, our nervous system, the exchange of information, this is all controlled by Vayu. Teja, which is the heating energy or the fire, it is in control of all type of enzymatic and chemical actions which produce thermogenesis, where there is some heat production. So all types of assimilation, metabolism, hormone activity, this is all controlled by the Teja Mahabhuta. All the fluid elements in our body, they are controlled by the Jala Mahabhuta or the water or the liquid component. So for example, blood, lymph, urine, saliva, plasma, all these things are controlled by the Jala Mahabhuta. And the Prithvi or the earth element, which is the most stable element, it creates stable structures in our body like the bones. You know, a person might die. If you bury them, 1000 years later, you will not find anything else, but you will find their bones. So bones are the most stable components of our body, and they come from the most stable component in the universe, which is the earth element. So this dominant primordial elements in herbs will affect body structures having similar elemental dominance. So for example, if you select a very heating herb which has a lot of dominance of fire component, it will have an effect on your enzymes and on your hormone. If you select a herb which is very liquid in nature, it will affect your blood and lymphatic tissue. So just to give you some examples of common things in our diet and to see how they affect. So for example, if you take this kind of vegetable which is very common in India, I don't know if you get it in Israel. No, you don't. It's called as Karela. It's a bitter gourd, but you can replace it with any type of gourd which is kind of hollow inside. It is very beneficial for all types of hollow structures in our body. If you look at coffee, all of us, we know that when you take coffee, you can get tremors, you feel like going to the toilet. So there is a lot of movement and motility that is induced. If you take ginger, for example, we are going to talk about ginger later. It has an effect on our enzymes and on our hormones. If you take a liquid substance like coconut water, it is very refreshing, rehydrating, because it replenishes our blood tissue and our liquid components in the body. And if you take something like old cheese, like this Emmental cheese, for example, it can help to nourish your bones. We know that cheese normally contains a lot of calcium, so it can be very nourishing to the bones. So again, looking at the similarity, morphological similarity of a substance, we can have an idea about where in the body this particular substance can work. So again, it is a kind of targeted action. Now let's look a little bit about the metabolic pathways. So Ayurveda thinks that whenever we eat food, first it is divided into two components. One component is the part of the food that we can utilize and assimilate, and the other part is the stuff that we cannot utilize and assimilate and that needs to be discarded from the body. This is called as the mala. And from the part that we retain, we create our body structures and complementary body structures, which are called as dhatu and upadhatu. Now, why I gave you this metabolic pathway is because herbs have also to go through this metabolic pathway. And Ayurveda believes that if we use a whole herb, there will be some components which will be usable for the body and some components which will not be usable, but we need to have this non-usable components because they have an important function. Just like we all know that, and we will talk about this when we talk about the constipation. If we don't have enough fiber, we will not have good elimination. So we need to have this kind of components which are not so utilizable because they balance out the whole plant. So Ayurveda says it's always more better to use a complete plant and not just to use an extract or just to take out an active principle and use it. For example, let me just tell you about this. You know that aspirin comes from the plant Cinchona, right? So now we know that if you take aspirin in its raw, just aspirin as the active molecule, it can create a lot of hyperacidity and it can create blood thinning and different kind of hemorrhagic problem. But if you take the whole plant Cinchona, it doesn't have this side effects because the plant is whole. There are also some components which balance each other out. So it is always better to use the whole plant. Now, another component that we have in Ayurveda is this understanding of Vipaka. I told you that there are 6 tastes, but ultimately in our body, what we have these 3 functional components, which are called as the Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So, whatever food or plants we use, they are converted into just 3 types of post-digestive taste because they nourish specifically either the Vata, Pitta, or the Kapha. So most of the things which are sweet and salty, ultimately they get converted into sweet and they nourish the Kapha. Sour things remain sour and they nourish Pitta, and Katu, Tikta, and Kashaya, or pungent, bitter, and astringent, they are converted into pungent and they nourish the Vata. Okay, another important thing that we think about when we are selecting the herb, we think about whether that particular substance, whether it is anabolic or whether it is catabolic. Ayurveda believes that if a particular substance is dominant in water element or liquid element, it leads to anabolism because liquid is necessary for cohesion. Just take for example, when you are at home, you are making dough to make pita bread. You have the dry flour, you add water so that it gives it a shape. So water always brings things together. So it is anabolic. Whereas fire component always leads to separation. So this is why when you take a piece of butter that is frozen and you put it on the fire, it starts running because fire separates. Water brings together, fire separates. So anabolic herbs are normally nutritive. They add to the body. And catabolic herbs or heating herbs are more cleansing, or we use them as adjuvants. Adjuvants means, like I told you about black pepper, something that will help the main herb to act more better. So for example, these 2 herbs we are going to talk about and they are available in Israel as far as I know. Brahmi, it is a brain tonic. It is an anabolic herb because it adds to the body. Whereas black pepper is more cleansing. We use it as an adjuvant. It is a catabolic herb. So cold herbs or herbs having cooling potency, they are anabolic, and herbs which have heating potency, they are catabolic. Yes, Yannick?
When you say Brahmi, you mean Bacopa or Bacopa? Yes. And only Bacopa? Bacopa
Maniari, because the other one which is taken quite often is Centella asiatica, that is Manduk Parni, that is another plant from the Ayurvedic point of view.
But for what reason a lot of people make this mistake and thought that Centella is also Brahmi? Is there any reason for this mistake?
Because of the morphological characteristics, they look very similar. The leaf of both Brahmi and Manduk Parni, they look very similar. Their habitat is very similar. They both are very aquatic kind of plants. They grow near watery marshy. The effect is more or less similar. But we are going to talk about the next point actually is Prabhava. Prabhava, which means special action. Brahmi has this special action of being anxiolytic, anti-epileptic, which Manduk Parni is not. So they do have similar actions, but not exactly the same. So the last thing that we think about when we select a herb is this concept called as Prabhava. Prabhava means a special action. So normally we have seen so far that the action or the manifestation of a plant will be according to the characteristic. So for example, black pepper, we saw that it is heating. So the action would be, it is a heating plant. It would be a catabolic plant. But in very few plants, we sometimes see that this logic doesn't fit together. The action that we see doesn't match the characteristic. That's why I've put a cross. So the guna is not equal to the karma. So sometimes the action is different from the characteristic. And this is called as prabhava. This is a special action. Now, like I said, not every plant has this prabhava, but when there is prabhava, it takes precedence over any other thing that is present in the plant. So that's why I've given you an hierarchy. Normally, the topmost or at the top of the chain is prabhava. If a plant has a particular prabhava, it will always act according to that prabhava. In the herbs that we see, we are going to see a couple of herbs which have prabhava. If prabhava is not present, the plant will act according to its virya. Virya is this potency, whether it is anabolic or catabolic. If two plants have similar vipaka but different virya, vipaka was the post-digestive test, then it will work according to its virya. And the last is the taste, the rasa. So this is the hierarchy of the plants. We are going to see plant Haritaki, which is part of the Triphala complex. It has prabhava, and Brahmi, just like I mentioned, it has also prabhava. There are a few plants, and we will see a couple of them. Okay, location. You know, always when we are thinking about a good place or to start a business, we always think about location or also to stay, location. In Ayurveda also, we give a lot of importance to the habitat where we get the plants. Ayurveda believes that the environment, the natural habitat of the plant will impart its imprint on the plant. For example, if a plant grows in very hot, dry climate, it will impart this heat, hotness and dryness to the plant. So this plant will have this kind of characteristics. Now, if I take this plant and plant it in an area which is not dry and hot, maybe cold and wet, I will see that the efficacy goes down. So Ayurveda believes that herbs which grow in their natural habitat are always much more potent than herbs which are grown in artificial habitats. In Ayurveda, we divide the habitats into three types. One is called as the Jangal Desh. So these are very dry regions. Anupadesh, which means very marshy or watery regions, and Sadharan Desh, which is like a mixture. So normally in dry areas, you will have plants like Shalaki or Salaki boswellia. This grows in the dry areas. And you will have all types of ficus plants and also Amalaki or Amla. It also normally grows in this kind of area. So if you have Amla coming from that area, the Amla will be much more better. So always look at the source. Where are you getting your plant? Similarly, plants which grow in very marshy area, they have a lot of water in them. Plants like coconut and bananas or also Brahmi, Shatavari. These are kind of the plants that require a lot of marshy area. So the source is very important. Similarly, in Ayurveda, we have a concept that we should harvest the plant at a particular time. And there is a whole science behind this, because, you know, in the plants, in different parts of the plants, the active principles develop at different times. So if we have knowledge of this, and if we harvest that plant at that particular time, then we would have maximum benefit. I'll give you the example. Turmeric, curcuma, traditionally it is supposed to be harvested at night, right? That's why even one of the names, synonyms in Sanskrit for turmeric is Nisha. Nisha means the night. Now research shows that one of the most important ingredient in turmeric, which is the biocurcumin levels are the highest at night. Now, how did these people know this 2,000 or 3,000 years ago is beyond me, but they knew about this. And so if you have a curcuma which is cultivated in the dark or it is harvested in the night, it will show much more beneficial effect. So harvesting time is also a very important component. Now, we just have a couple of slides left in this first part. In Ayurveda, it is described that keep things simple. don't try to overcomplicate things. So there is no need that you have a formulation of 20 different herbs. If you have good knowledge of herbs, if your analysis of the patient is good, then it is always better to use a single plant. Because as we will see later on when we study a little bit about the plants, every plant can have multifunctional utility. It can be used in various modes. And then we have this whole idea of processing. Just by changing the form, we can use the same plant in different areas or for different reasons. So as far as possible, try to keep it simple because it is cost effective, it is resource effective. And also suppose you have a patient who starts showing some side effects to the plants that you have given. If you are using only one plant, then it is very easy. You just reduce that plant and the effects will go away. But if you have given 20 plants, then you will have to go on trying each one. Okay, I remove this and then I see if I remove it. So it's always better if you can keep it simple. It's always much more better. So, for example, ginger, in Ayurveda, it is called as Vishwa Bhaishajya, which means the universal medicine, because it can be used for so many different conditions. We will be talking about ginger in the herbs that we talk about, and it is almost universally available. So that's why it is called as universal medicine. This just one single herb has many benefits. So like I said, we can take the same herb and we can use it in different forms. So for example, let's take ginger. I can scrape the ginger and squeeze out the juice. I can pound the ginger and make a kind of a chutney or a pulp. I can boil the ginger with water. So I take 1 part of ginger, add 16 times water and reduce it to 2. So in the brackets, I've given the formulations. Or I can make a hot infusion like a tea. I take 1 part ginger and I add 6 parts hot water or 4 parts hot water and let it steep and then drink it like we make a mint tea. Or for plants which have a lot of volatile oils where it is not good to use heat, I can make a cold infusion. So I take plain room temperature, ambient temperature water and 6 parts, and to this I add 1 part ginger and I just let it infuse and I drink. So the same plant, I can use it in different methods. The nice thing is that every method has a specific area where it will work. For example, dry powders of herb, they work more on the hollow or where there is cavity. Whereas liquid preparations of plants, they work more on the periphery. So dry ginger is a central circulation stimulant, whereas fresh ginger or the ginger juice is a peripheral circulation stimulant. We will see this when we talk about ginger. So by just changing the form, we can use the same herb and it can affect different areas. Now, an ideal herb, what should be an ideal herb from the Ayurvedic point of view? These are 4 important characteristics that it should have. It should be possible to make multiple formulations from it. This herb should have multidimensional properties so that it can be used in a wide variety of diseases. The herb should be potent and enriched. So old herb is normally not selected, and it should be suitable to use in that particular person. So these are the ideal characteristics of any herb. So for example, why do we consider Haritaki, one of the Trifalas, so important? Because Haritaki, we can use it in so many different forms. We can use it as a powder, we can make a decoction, we can make an alcoholic preparation out of it. I can take Haritaki with jaggery in the summer. I can take Haritaki with candy sugar in the autumn. I can take Haritaki with Piper longum or Pipili in winter. And I can take it with honey in spring. And it will help me to remain healthy. This is called as Haritaki Rasayan. So just to give you an idea, that's why Haritaki is considered as one of the herbs. Okay, I think this is the last component of this first part. But you must have seen that many of the herbs are bitter, and many times you will see that companies make formulations where they put some sugar coating on it or some coating so that we don't get the taste appreciation. Ayurveda believes that as soon as anything comes into contact with our tongue, we have a type of kapha there. Lital has talked about it in the morning, which is called as bodhaka kapha, which gives our body information regarding the composition of that particular thing, so that our body can digest it and assimilate it better. So as we put the herb in the mouth, the information goes and then it will travel through the body, and every part it touches, it will have different actions. So even if the pill is bitter, Ayurveda recommends, as far as possible, try to take it with taste. Do not try to mask the taste. Of course, if you are giving it for children, or the herb is really very bad to taste that it induces vomiting, in that case you can mask it. But as far as possible, better not to do it. There are also a couple of research papers that I found. For all the research papers that I'm putting in the slides, at the end I have given links for all of these papers. So you will find at the end maybe a link for about 100 different papers. So you can go and read out for yourself. Okay, so this is the end of the first part. Let me just check the chat if there are any questions about this, so I can answer before we take a small break. Lital, everything is written in Hebrew, or it is you have typed?
Answered some questions in between and clarified a few things, but
okay.
Questions, like really questions.
Okay. So Yaniv, is it okay if we take a small break?
Yeah, we can take like 10 minutes. It's okay?
Yeah, 10 minutes. 10 minutes should be fantastic.
So 1:32 is